Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back to the Citrine Path. Today, again, we have myself, Amber, and my amazing co-host.
And I'm Patsy from Violet Elements. Before we get started here, we just want to share real quick that this is our journeys and our guest journey on their spiritual life and their herbal life. So, everything we talk about here, we do recommend you do your own research and definitely talk to your provider before you start any herbal remedies or home remedies.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Citrine Path. So today, we're going to be talking about animism, and kind of where it came from and some of the beliefs behind it. How are you doing this morning, Mom?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm awake. Step one.
Moving in the right direction, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had to put my microphone and stuff back together this morning. Mr. Jameson was doing work stuff and tore it apart.
He was so cute.
Mr. Hulkman like ripped the padding off of it and dude. So, where did you originally hear about animism from?
Um, That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I think how it started for me was so I've always been kind of fascinated in a way with just religion in general. I always found it like super interesting. Um, and when I was younger, I used to go anywhere anybody would let me go. So like I had a group of friends that went to like a Catholic church. So then I would try to tag along with them on Sundays. Um, One of my grandma's friends went to the Kingdom Hall, so sometimes I'd go with them. There's these girls that lived across the street from us, and their grandpa was a pastor of some sort, and so sometimes I'd go to their church. Um, and I always just thought it was interesting that they told a lot of the same stories, but like maybe a few details might have changed. And or the characters had different names in their stories, but they had similar characteristics. And so I would always like point that out to them and they're like, "Oh no, our religion is nothing like their religion." And so I always like believed there was something like, higher power, God, Heavenly Father, whatever you would want to reference. Um And then I would say, like, a majority of my time I went to a Christian fellowship church, which I felt the most connected to, I guess. Um, but that church was very different than other ones that I had gone to. Like, um, he literally just sat up there and read directly out of the Bible and didn't really say, like, this is what's happening. He said, like, this is what I understand from this. This is what I get, or this is the first thing that comes to my mind when I read this, but take it for your own, type thing. And that was the first time I realized that all of the stories in the Bible are told pretty much at the same time frame to a point. So, and that was one of the things that he would do. So he would say, like, let's turn to Matthew, whatever, and let's read it. And so he would read it. And he goes, okay, so now let's go to Luke, page whatever, and let's read his perspective on the same event. And then you go, okay, let's go to whatever and let's read this one. So he would always do like 3 or 4 points in the Bible or chapters, and they were all telling the same story. And then it kind of dawned on me that, well, duh, because they're all letters or journal type entries written by different people. That's why they have different names of each chapter. But it was one of those things like I knew, but it didn't quite click or understand it until then. So then that's when I started looking at it a little different because it's like, well, why are we interpreting what he said? Like, just read it as it is. Like, don't put a spin on it. Don't add to it. Don't make it a mystical. He meant this by saying that, like it's literally some dude's version of an event. And even between the different chapters, the details varied a little bit. Like one person saw it from this way, another person saw it from this way. And then that's when I kind of started looking at religion. Well, maybe religion to a point is just somebody else's version of something that happened. And then that's what structured their belief. And then a new religion was born, type thing. So then I wanted to know, well, how did it start? Like, what were some of the first religions? So then I just kept going back farther and farther, and then like started really looking into like what most people would consider pagan, which pagan is just technically pagan is anything else that's not a mainstream religion. Like if you look up the actual definition of pagan. So then I started looking up what religions were considered pagan religions. And then a lot of those are like like what was practiced during the Viking Age or pre-Christianity and all of that. And then come to find that Atlantis was like it was mentioned a few times, but not a lot. So then I started looking into that more. And then I realized like, wow, that's pretty much what I've been saying my whole life, is that I am spiritual, not religious. And the belief that everything has a soul, because technically everything was at once living. And then the more I just looked into it, the more it just like felt right. And then, yeah, long story short, short story long.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I never really, like, asked you why you looked this up. I just know that you've always been intrigued by all kinds of different religions. And I thought it was interesting because before you told me about it, I didn't know what animism was. I just knew, like, you know, I don't know, it was more of like a subconscious thing. Like, I name all my plants. Like, every plant in my home pretty much has a name. Like, I name my cars. Um, like, I will sit there and talk to my car when we're going up a hill and, like, rub her dash and tell her good girl, like, stupid stuff that most people don't do. But, that's what I come to find out. I thought animism was just, like, natural objects, but I was looking up it's, called the Encyclopedia of Anthropology, um, and they were talking about how there's, like, now a modern day animism where it's like, mechanical objects and things like that also now is what people also consider, you know, animism if you are giving those objects basically a soul and personality.
Well, yeah. So let's look at it this way. So even okay, so trying to think of a way to word this to where I don't even confuse myself trying to explain to you. um, so like even the stuff they use to make cell phones and computers, there's certain rocks and minerals that they dig out of the side of the mountains, in like other countries. So when they mine those, they're at what used to be the bottom of seabeds. So what's in seas? There's animals, plankton, all kinds of stuff that's like microscopic in the water, all of that stuff. So, but if all that stuff has to break down and get squished over time and with heat to create something, all of that material that went in to make that technically was alive. So, like even sand, what's sand made of? little tiny particles of other rocks, seashells, bones that broke down over time, you know. So technically, the sand was all once living things,
You're gonna do this to me
right?
this early in the morning?
This
Like
is what I'm saying. Like it. So then, if you think about that, what's glass made out of?
sand and heat,
Sand and heat. How do you make heat?
pressure,
Well, I mean, like if you're gonna do it, let's go old school. So fire. What do you burn in the fire? Trees.
wood, coal.
What
Yeah.
was what was alive? Trees,
Oh, Patricia.
right?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I never even thought it like that before. And then, like, you have to use silver and stuff like that to, like, make your batteries and stuff nowadays. So that comes from the earth and was from other things also.
Your house. What's your house made out of?
Oh, my
Trees.
Atlanta. Yeah. That just set me for a brain loop for a minute.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like it it seems so simple and like, well, yeah, duh, of course, you know, like animals are living things. And like on the episode that we did about the plants can talk underground. Okay, so we've already established that even though plants don't have a brain, clearly they communicate. Um, and they put off frequency. So technically, wouldn't that be talking? So how can they talk and sense other plants without having a brain? So clearly they're alive. So do they have a soul? Probably, because like, how can you talk and exist and be alive without one? Because if your soul is like your essence of you, you know, so then that kind of keeps going, and then clearly words affect plants. So if they weren't alive and didn't have a soul, they wouldn't care what you said to them. So yeah.
Yeah. No, and I've thought for a long time, like, plants have souls. Oh, well. I have a book, an identification book, and it's, like, the plants of the Pacific Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in the front of that book is what really introduced me to the idea that, there's more to plants than just growing out of the ground and cut it down when you need it. Like, he talks about in the front of that book, stopping and, like, asking the plant for permission before you cut it, and at first I was like, "What the heck is he talking about?" I'm like, "I'm not gonna sit there and ask a plant for permission because that's outrageous, it's a plant." Well, then I stopped and thought about it more. I'm like, "Well, you don't have to, like, actually ask the plant for permission to do it." Like, you just sitting there thinking of the plant, it sounds wackadoo because it sounds weird, but, if once you start practicing it over and over again and start realizing and feeling the energy that comes off of them, you'll start to understand what he meant by asking for permission. Um, and like even rocks and stones and crystals, like I'm a huge firm believer in crystals and the power that they have. I mean, I named all three of my kids after stones, but it's the energy and stuff coming off of it. How can you deny that there's not something more than it just being a rock? So one thing I wanted to tell you real quick I thought was super cool. So, I guess there was Siberian hunters, and they told an anthropologist that animals, trees, and rivers are people just like us because they move, grow, and breathe, but they are distinct from the inanimate objects such as stones, skis, and food products that have explained he explained are alive but immobile. So I thought it was super cool, um, that they like described the trees and the rivers and things like that. They're alive because they move and they breathe and they grow just like us. Like that's super, super cool to me.
Yeah, and even if you go off just that theory, then you're right about the stones and crystals because if you leave the crystals alone underground and let them do their thing, they do grow. That's why you have different size crystals and stuff that you find, like that's the same concept. Um there was a lady, and I think you actually shared it with me, and she was talking about um the cutting down of the trees. Do you remember what video I'm talking about?
Oh, no.
Um and she was talking about how they were like removing trees from their property or something like that. And that they had problems, like, the first couple ones, and so then she started, like, talking to the trees, and basically, short story here, she would just tell them like, "Hey, I'm really sorry, tree, like, you've done well, but, you know, we need to do this to the land underneath you. We're gonna cut you down in a couple days," and basically, like, warned the trees what was going on and that they were gonna cut them down and why and what they were gonna do, and she's like, "Yeah, it, like, went a lot easier. They didn't have any as much problems with it," but she said she could tell a difference in the trees, like, the leaves started to fall and the branches didn't look as well and whatever. And so then she started paying attention to it, and over the years, she claims that she could hear the plants and feel how they feel, and so she was like, "Yeah, they just want time to know that they need to leave, that their soul needs to leave." And I just thought that was, like, super interesting. It's kinda the same thing. At first, you're like, it's a little out there," but then after you think about it, you're like, "Well, that makes sense," you know? Just like if you're gonna say every living thing has a soul and is alive, then of course, like, why wouldn't you warn the tree? Like, you're gonna cut it down. I don't know. It gets a little sometimes hard to, like, wrap your brain around it, but you kinda have to think about it that way because that'd be like, "Oh, sometimes it's this way, but then it's not on other things." Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, like, if it's like, if you don't feel that way about the trees, then it's not gonna be that way about all the other things in your life.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you can't pick and choose and take the same rules. If you can't apply it across the board, then is it really a rule you believe in, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's what I think is so interesting is a lot of these, like, cultures and group of people that practice animism as just, like, their life, it's literally their life. Like, everything they do and have has a soul. It's not just, like, the trees and the rocks and stuff. Like, they're like, it kinda explained it here, their food products. There's like, the Siberian group, at least. The skis they use to get to and from the village had a soul. Like, their craftsmanship of things that they made have a soul. Even their words have a soul. And so what I thought was super interesting when it said their words have a soul, it reminded me of Reiki. And like your symbols and stuff that you get whenever
Mhm.
you level up in Reiki. I was like, that makes so much sense because, if words have a soul and that's such sacred words, that would make sense why those have so much power on you.
Yeah, exactly. And oh, she's way over there. My little plant nettle that I got, um, so a couple weeks ago, we were able to go get a bunch of houseplants from a lady that had to move out of her house, and she couldn't take them. And the people that were helping her move, I assume it was her family, um, basically said, "There's just so many of them. We could only handle so much. We've been trying to sell them, give them away for free. Nobody's taking them." So she literally said, "Take as many as you can, otherwise they're going in the dumpster." And all of them looked very sad. Like, there was a few of them I thought I was just taking to take the pots because they looked a little on the worse for wear. Um, but little Miss Nettle was the worst looking ones of the bunch, and all of her leaves were all, like, shriveled up, all of her limb let me just grab her. Hold on. Let me just grab Nettle. Okay. So, you see her? So this is Nettle, and she is a one of the names is a painted nettle, so that's why we call her Nellie. Um, but, like, see all these branches? Was laying all down against the pot, and she even has little tiny baby sprouts that are growing now on the inside. Um, and all of these leaves were all shriveled up. I can even tell what the pattern was on them when we first brought her home. And so we just watered her really good and then just kind of waited. Well, after a little bit, some of her leaves started to perk up a little bit. So I did Reiki on her. And within a very short amount of time, she looked a lot better. And so every day I would come in here and talk to her and like check on her and give her a little bit more Reiki. And I'd say, no, I was sending you pictures and updates on her. I think it was by the second day, maybe the third day. She looked like this.
Yeah, she looks really
Isn't that
good.
crazy? Yeah.
Like, I remember the first time you showed me her, I did not think she was gonna make it. Like, it looked like she was
Yeah.
beyond help.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
But I mean, I think it's been 2 weeks since we got her. It's not this last weekend, but the weekend before. But I mean, these little sprouts, they're kind of hard to see. But these little sprouts right here in the middle, I don't even know if they were there. And they're a good inch tall now. And then she even has new growth that's already started off the stems here. So, yeah. And then, of course, she has a little quartz crystal in there just to kind of give her some love. But yeah, so I mean, kind of the same thing. Like if I'm clearly giving her Reiki helped, encouraged her, gave her strength, and did its thing, because that's what Reiki does. Um, so if it helps a plant, then the plant has to have some type of energy force, and if it has an energy force, then why wouldn't it be alive?
Yeah, yeah. And then if like we were talking about our episode, we were talking about the plants and stuff. If it's the trees and different things, were pushing nutrients and water and food into their offspring, then obviously they have a soul to care about that offspring or want that offspring to survive. So, I think that is super strong proof that there's something more than just plants. Oh,
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
that I also seen something online, about now they're trying to study if plants can feel pain. I don't know how true it is yet because I haven't looked
Oh,
into it, but that'll be something we'll have to do.
yeah. Well, the guy, he's Ranger Riff. I know I've shared some of his stuff with you. But he's down in Northern California, and he is with Redwood Rising. He has since retired, so I don't think he's officially a forest ranger anymore. Um, but he does a lot of stuff about talking about how, like in the redwood trees, like if a tree falls, how quickly another plant or tree would root off of it and grow because it's higher up. So it has an advantage over the plants that are trying to grow on the ground to compete for space. And so I always thought it was super interesting. I mean, we're kind of beating a dead horse here, but about how would the plants know that? Like, how would they have this overwhelming desire to thrive if they didn't, you know? And I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I thought
just find
that
it super
when
interesting when he does his videos.
yeah, I love Ranger Rick. He's so funny. He cracks me up every time I watch one of his videos. But yeah, I thought it was super interesting too. And then you would see like these big root systems that came off of these trees that were on top of the logs. And as the log underneath degraded, it would leave like a huge like cavern almost of roots underneath this tree that the animals and stuff would then live in. I thought was super interesting. Speaking of redwoods and stuff, so we mentioned before on the other past podcast that redwood are we are year rock, and redwoods is like a huge thing in our tribe. Like all of the trees, all of the animals, every single thing around us is alive and is there to be a teacher for us. It's not even just, oh, it's living and it's here to give us resources and stuff like that, but respect the resources. They literally were there to teach us every single plant. So, I think that's something really cool that, I've appreciated our in our culture is that every single thing, like even the canoes. I mean, like they put organs in every canoe because it's alive and living and needs those things to survive. Like I haven't heard of another culture put organs on a canoe before because that's how alive that they saw it.
Yeah, and the traditional, you would take a whole tree and carve it out, which a lot of cultures do that. But they would try to do it together as like a community and do it. And they had to pick the right one. It kind of also reminds me of, oh my gosh, what cartoon was that or animated movie that was the surfer?
Oh, Surf's Up,
Um,
the penguin?
is that what it is?
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, when he was talking about, like, you have to find the special tree and you have to, like, feel the tree and it has to be the right one and you have to, like, get in the groove and feel where the tree wants to be carved, like, all of that, like, if the tree wasn't alive and you weren't trying to harness the essence of the tree and the soul of it to make your surfboard, you wouldn't give a crap. Like, you would just cut it into shape and be done and move on, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
I guess we could talk a little bit about
Oh, we
kinda
got
the
6 minutes left.
history of it. Okay. Um, so it is also one of the earliest documented religions or way of lives that, um, just in general, like around the world type thing. But so many of even the main religions that are practiced today have a lot of similar characteristics. So it kind of evolved into some of the what am I trying to say? Some of the main ones now. Um, But it said that there's, like, one person that is kind of like the father of the religion, that made it more mainstream, and he was a Victorian anthropologist. His name was E.B. Taylor, and he was the one that kind of put a different look on it and wrote about it, and so then it kind of became more of a thing outside of indigenous cultures because most indigenous people practice some sort of it, and, like, we've kind of already touched base on that a little bit, um, but he believed that, like, the heart of it was animation of nature, and so that's kinda how he wrote about it and way that he perceived it, and so, in a sense, everything has a spiritual being inhabited within it. So within the trees, rocks, waterfalls, etc. And so that's how he took it in and how he worded it and used it. And that's how he wrote about it. So moving forward, that's kind of how everybody looked at it instead of being like the tree is a person, like how you were talking about the Siberian um, tribe that you were looking into. So this was that there was a spiritual being within the item. So it's kind of just a little bit different um, look on it, but kind of the same thing.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. Um, but I mean, every place you go, they might have similar beliefs, but a little bit different. But I think it's so interesting that, all these, our personal experience from what we've learned from our tribe versus the Siberian tribe. Um, and then now this guy, it's all the same idea, but a little bit different beliefs and backstory to the beliefs, which I think is amazing. Like, how far apart are they? How many years apart are these situations happening, and yet they're all still so similar? Like, because most of the time in anthropology and stuff like that, if you're not close to each other, nothing will be the same between the two of you. Like, look at Asia and then look at Australia. Like, the beliefs that there was in those areas are very different, yet this belief is still pretty common. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's like I don't know. I think I've came across in my studies that I could recall like 5 or excuse me, like 5 or 6 different branches of it. And there's like one that's a more modern one. There's one um that kind of see each other a little bit different. So kind of like how you could have a couple different types of Christian groups or different churches within the Christian religion. It's kind of the same thing. And so each belief is a little bit different. I don't necessarily claim one. I just kind of like live my life as everything has a soul, you know. Um the plants, the trees, the house, the car, like like you said you named your car. Our car is called Pauline. Pauline is very high maintenance and throws a hissy fit when she needs an oil change and um makes things very well known by flashing lights and making beeps and stopping all of a sudden when there's nothing in the road. So, um, it's kinda just one of those things, like, I'm sure I know there's a lot of books that people have written, but kinda the same thing. I'm kinda go with what I feel is right versus what somebody else is telling me which is right and what I have to believe, and I think that's why I never found what you would call, like, a mainstream religion right. Because I feel like it should be my relationship with the universe or who whatever. I do feel like there's, like, somebody in charge, kinda like the overseer. I refer to him as the All-Father and Mother Earth, and, that between the 2 of them is what's created this life, and so I kinda feel like my relationship between those things is for me to determine and not for somebody else to, like, tell me. And, like, tell me how I should feel about them and that kinda thing. Um, yeah.
No, I completely feel the same way that you do. Like, I've always thought I've never really been attached to any one religion growing up. Because I always felt like Christianity was very contradictory. And I'm like, well, how can somebody love you, but then also damn you to hell? Like, it just didn't make sense to me. Remember, we do not treat, cure, or diagnose any illness. So if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, please reach out to your provider.
So we are always so honored and blessed that you spent your time with us, and we can't wait to visit with you next time. So please come back and visit us, but until then, go forth with love and intention.